before you start, just before the next person speaks, give me a moment to move the microphones around. We'll let you sit where you are, but we'll have to move the microphones so we can hear you well. So just give a beat before the next person speaks. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Amos Brown, President of the San Francisco branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And I also have the honor of serving as a member of the National Board of Directors of NAACP. And more importantly, I'm the senior pastor of the historic Third Baptist Church, where I've served now 47 years. And on this Valentine's Day, a day that symbolizes love for the beloved, it symbolizes compassion, care, and concern. As president of NAACP, I submit this notion to the general public that though African Americans have found some love in the city, but it has not loved us enough. For we are gathered today, on this day, to say there are two issues that demand our attention. And I want to speak to those two issues against the backdrop of a quote from my teacher, the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was in 1963 from a Birmingham jail in a time when white clergy persons had dubbed him, labeled him as being an outside agitator. He didn't curse. He didn't show anger, but he uttered these words: I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. End of the quote. What is the application today? We have, to my left, Attorney John Burris, represents the family of a young man who was murdered by a police officer here in San Francisco, so-called city of St. Francis, so-called place that claims to be progressive and liberal. However, today, we don't feel love because, unfortunately, the DA of this city has made the public pronouncement that she will not bring charges against the officer who was guilty of pulling the trigger. We will have now Attorney John Burris to speak to us regarding this legal injustice from his perspective, and he will present the aunt of the young man who is no longer with us.
Just a moment, please. Watch out for all this.
Thank you, Reverend. First off, I don't represent the family per se anymore. That case that I was involved in is over. It was a civil case. We completed that case. I'm here, though, because while I was representing the family, Ms. O'Neill, I was particularly concerned that a criminal prosecution should occur, because the manner in which the young man was killed was he was unarmed, he was not a threat, and the officer recklessly, with evil intent, shot a gun through his window as young O'Neill was running by and killed him, which is an unconscionable act, criminal in its nature. And I couple that with the fact that I represented another family, Sean Moore, who was likewise killed under circumstances that are highly questionable. Each of those cases were in fact being prosecuted by the previous district attorney. And now we're at a point where the current prosecutor has either sent signals or certainly is making indications that she is not going to criminally prosecute either one of them. This is a most shocking occurrence in the present day, because all over America we are looking at cases where young men have been shot and killed, and in some cases, in many cases, the prosecution in the local communities are in fact prosecuting those individuals, those officers. And so here we have a situation where the prosecution is decided by another prosecutor to prosecute, and the local prosecutor who takes over decides not to. This is a shocking occurrence. And it really is insulting to the lives of those people who have lost, and insulting, I think, and a travesty to the criminal justice system. Because it's difficult enough in America and in the Bay Area to have prosecution of police officers for crimes that they commit. And it's not something that I make and allege loosely or willingly. It is something I have to believe that the facts themselves justify the prosecution. And that certainly is the situation was, what was the life of the officer in danger, and what was the person doing at the time that caused this to be fact. Well, in cases where no danger was created, and the young man wasn't doing anything of a dangerous nature to the officer other than running by, that in and of itself is criminal, because that officer took the life of someone when his own life was not in danger. And that is the most disturbing component of this, is that a judgment now looks like, unless I know there are different facts, are not being based upon the actual facts of the case, or someone has decided that those facts aren't good enough, or that person's life isn't worthy of acknowledgement. And that is a disturbing component of this, because the young man himself was in fact running away. He was running by. He was not running at. And for him to be shot and killed point blank when an officer shooting through the window, that officer, there should be a price to pay for that. And we thought that had taken place. We finished the civil case. We understood that the criminal case was proceeding, and now a new DA comes in and decides not to. We cannot have justice, even-handed justice, if the life of an African-American male under one circumstance is worthy of prosecution, and then in another circumstance it is not. That is a disparity in the application of the law, and it's an affront to the judicial system, the quality of the judicial system that is taking place here. So I'm here supporting NAACP, and although I don't represent the family, I do represent the issue of justice that does not occur on an even-handed way. And it's unjust to take the life of a young man and then decide that it's unworthy of prosecution for whatever reason. And so I'm just saying that, look, if we look at what has happened in different jurisdictions, I had just come back from New Mexico where a young man was shot and killed multiple times. And there the police tried to suggest that he himself had did something when he was unarmed. So this unarmed killing of African-American men has to stop somewhere. Unfortunately, the DA in a local county has that authority. And in this particular case, that authority was exercised judiciously, and now it has been rejected by a subsequent DA. And the facts themselves have not changed. The facts are clear. A young man was running by, unarmed, and a police officer panicked or whatever he wanted, shot through the window of his own car when he was in a position of safety, and shot and killed this young man. Those facts are not changed. The for a DA to see now and say that's not sufficient basis, that's unconscionable. It's just unconscionable. So, justice in itself, as they say, sometimes can only be in the eyes of the beholder. But in any case, truth itself should be consistent no matter who sees it. And in this particular case, the truth is that this young man was shot and killed unarmed, running by an officer who was in a position of safety, and therefore did not have a right to kill this young man. And so I've looked at this case as well as the Sean Moore case. We're not talking about that now, but I've read about that in the newspaper the other day, and that again suggests that the DA is not going to take action against, in that case, when that young man was minding his own business at his door, and the police came, ultimately created an environment, and ultimately he gets shot and he dies. So,
Can you refamiliarize
And
us with the name of the
just
victim?
one.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And the injustice just persists. It's like a virus, keeps moving in this city. We have a 9-member commission, Reparations Commission. And to my right here is this young man, Daniel Landry, serves on this commission. Commission members have received threats from people in this Bay Area. They made jokes out of the notion that reparations should be paid to black people. That is a glaring instance of injustice. Well, we offered reparations for the Japanese, and now the Japanese in this city have Japantown. We offered reparations for the Jewish community, and they should have done that. Well, that terrible, inhumane Holocaust. We have offered reparations for Western Europe after that World War II, and that place was almost decimated. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And any San Franciscan who says that African Americans do not deserve reparations need to check themselves and look in the mirror and see themselves as being the personification of evil. What is evil? The absence of the good. And it's not a good thing for African Americans to not have parity and equality of educational opportunities in the school district in San Francisco. It's not a good thing for San Francisco that the status of the health of blacks is in a horrible state. Baby Hunters Point, asthma, and cancer proliferating disproportionately. It is an unjust situation that though Chinatown has Chinatown, Japanese have Japanese town, but the redevelopment, so-called redevelopment, was not about redevelopment. It was about black removal. And consequently, the black community in this city is still fighting to hold on to the last corner, so to speak, in the bottle. The last corner of the old Harlem of the West, the Heritage Building, there at the corner of Ed and Fillmore. If San Francisco really loves and respects African Americans, we have a moral obligation to provide for African Americans the same kind of restoration, the same kind of reparation. And we are saying San Francisco has a long ways to go before we can claim to be a progressive and liberal city. And to put it in historical context, my friends, let me quote the last of the great schoolmasters who taught Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Who was he? One Benjamin Elijah Mays. What did that great schoolmaster say? To graduates in 1967, our problem in the future will not come from the rabid segregationists like George Wallace of Alabama, Faubus of Arkansas, Lester Maddox of Georgia, or even Ross Barnett of Mississippi. He said, our problem will come from the so-called progressive liberal whites who will wine and dine you in the swankiest of hotels sip tea with you, but we refuse to share economic and political power with you. End of the quote. San Francisco is guilty of what I call cotton candy liberalism. For if we were really liberal and progressive, black people would not be moving down from 16% of this population to now 4%. Shame, shame, shame on San Francisco. So on Valentine's Day, the day that we celebrate love, the NACP and the persons on this panel are saying San Francisco has not shown love for African Americans, and it's time that we admit our wrong, show that we're sorry, and act by supporting a sensible, reasonable plan of reparations. But anyone who categorically says that we don't deserve reparations is un-American, unkind, and not showing real justice. And now, Brother Daniel, member will speak of his perspective, a young man who's here in the Western Division, and he can tell you what he has experienced as a young man.
Well, Dr. I'm sorry, could I pause? I'm sorry to interrupt your flow, but just for a moment, I want to make sure we get everything. And pardon the interruption.
Dr. Brown, thank you, and Attorney Burrs. Dr. Brown, thank you, and Attorney Burrs, thank you, and thank you everybody for showing up this morning. It's so critical to talk about reparations in the time we're living in, and me as a born and raised young man here out of the Fillmore Western Addition, I can tell you offhand my experience under the redevelopment hardship, under the some of the policies that we had to deal with in the 70s and 60s. There's no wonder that the depopulation is impacting us in a way that we're losing hope. I will say, as a member of the Reparations Advisory Task Force, as well as a past member of the Justice for Mario Woods Coalition, to hear what we're still facing in 2023 should send a loud volume beat around America. San Francisco needs to atone. San Francisco needs to atone and stop playing politics on the future of black people here in this great city. I think if we do more work instead of threatening members on this committee and work with the NAACP and work with those who are standing up, trying to make this city a great city for everyone, we would do each other better justice and we would end up in a better place. So I sit here not only baffled, but really angry, but controlled anger at what I see and what I hear. It's unfortunate that we're getting phone calls from people telling us, you know, you need to just stop what you're doing for reparations. It's unfortunate that we're hearing people threaten members who's volunteering, giving time and effort just to have a fair dealing with this city. So I can't overstate the importance of reparations. We must, as a city, not only atone, repair. And if I break a window in here as an individual, it's not enough for me to apologize. Somewhere in there has got to be restitution. And I just read somewhere that over 1,000 cases, cold cases here in San Francisco by law enforcement has not been solved, and I can guarantee you most of those who have died in the streets of San Francisco is black and brown young men. So we call on this city to work with us because we're trying to figure this thing out for all of us so we won't move towards a city that black depopulation will eventually just make us a disappearing act for all of us here in San Francisco. I don't think at this time, and we thank the mayor and Supervisor Walton, because the Reparations Advisory Task Force have a task. And our task is very simple, to present this city with a plan. Our job is not to figure out the formulas and the mathematics of anything dealing with numbers and figures and values. Our job is present this city with a plan. And I'm encouraged that the plan that we're working on and that the plan that will be provided by June 2023 will be a plan and even a solution for this city to carry out. So I thank you again, Dr. Brown, and appreciate you allowing me this moment to speak.
Thank you. And now we shall hear from the President of Black Officers of Justice. Come forward, Ms. Captain Yolanda Williams. Let us hear remarks from her.
First of all, it saddens me that in the year 2023, during Black History Month, we have to sit here and have a dialogue of this nature. It's most unfortunate that we find ourselves in a situation where we're talking about police reform, transparency, police accountability, and yet once again, we witness factual evidence being downgraded to being merely a political ploy. The evidence, as Attorney John Burris has presented and stated to you, is clear. Mr. O'Neill did not threaten or present any type of threat to any of our San Francisco police officers when we're thinking in terms of whether he had a weapon or if he had intent to do harm, physical harm to them. It's unfortunate that the officer that was involved at the time of this incident, it was his first day out on the street. And he was in a Black community which he was unfamiliar with. However, he violated department policies and procedures. We have never been instructed to use our weapons and shoot outside, inside of a police car. And then to find that our chief, Chief William Scott, took the right actions immediately. He looked at the evidence and the facts in the matter and recognized that this officer had to be terminated from the San Francisco Police Department. And yet today we hear a DA procrastinating and stating that it does, the facts, there's concerns about the facts. There should be no concerns about the facts. What would we be doing today if there had not been the slight snippet of the video footage that was available to the public? And I'll tell you something. San Francisco, the city of St. Francis, is supposed to be the city that knows how. It's supposed to be the metropolitan, diverse city. However, today I have to say we are showing how racist we really are and how much a Black life does not matter. I say to you, D.A. Brooks, please reconsider your decision this day and let the citizens, let jurors decide what should be the charge to this former police officer, whether it be voluntary or involuntary manslaughter. Let the public make that decision. Thank you.
Now we shall hear from the O'Neill family. Ms. Christie.
First, I would like to,
Come to sit. Come.
first I would like to thank the NAACP. I'm sorry, my voice is a little hoarse.
Your name?
Yes, my name is April Green. I'm the aunt of Kiete Icky O'Neill, who was murdered by San Francisco police officer Samuel, December 1st of 2017 at the Alice Griffin Park. I first would like to thank the NAACP, Dr. Brown, Yolanda Williams, and her organization for the support during this troubling time for my family. I would like to talk a little bit about the case. I'm very familiar with the criminal part of the case because I was fortunate to have the file system that was given to me by John Burks when he was representing my sister in the civil case. We're talking about in this case 0.39 seconds. That's what we're talking about in the criminal case. From the moment my nephew took his foot off of the pedal of the van, leaving it running to go past the police officer's car, Samuel, before he was shot. I met with Brooke Jenkins several times with my attorney that I have, Brian Ford, Neil Hallinan, who has been assisting me. And one thing that she brought out in this case, and that we talked about, that's different than any other police cases, is usually when officers come on a scene, they come together on one accord because they listen to each other and communicate by the CAD is called in the car to know what's taking place. For one thing, the officer who was training Samuela, they weren't expected on the scene. They just kind of appeared out of nowhere. Everybody was a little surprised. But the other thing that happened is on the CAD it said no weapons of law. So everybody got the memo, I call it, except for Samuel, because he was in his car in the process of taking his gun out of his holster. I've learned a lot about this case, and usually when officers come on the scene, Brooks and I talked about it, they come gun ready. They all come out with their guns out at one time, if it's a scene that requires it, because they're in communication. Officer Samuel was the only one that had a gun out. The other officers did not. A matter of fact, what they're not telling you is because Jenkins don't want it to come out, is that after he shot my nephew, he walked behind the car and he still had the gun out wagging it. When there's no more threat on the scene, the gun has to go back into the holster. It has to always be protected. He did not put his back. There are videos out there, unfortunately, that the public is not seeing, that I have accessibility to. I will not give out because I'm scared of being sued by the other side. It shows the officers walking around while my nephew's on the ground. Their guns in their holster, his is wagging out. The training officer was asked, why did he go up? Because he did take the gun from Samuel. He went up and took the gun from him. After he took his gun, he sat him in the police car. And immediately, they sent another officer to come and get him off the scene. Samuel's the training officer said the reason he took the gun, because out of fear that he might shoot someone else. Because there was civilians walking around as well as the police officers. It was apparent he snapped. He lost control. Thank God that training officer took his gun, because he might have started shooting other people. So that was a smart move. There is other pressing evidence, but that alone is enough evidence for prosecution. I think it was a very smart charge that the former DA, Chase Boudin, did voluntary manslaughter. It should be first-degree murder, because if we did that, it would be first-degree murder. That it's already implied the officer had some type of fear, but it's not enough to justify him using this gun at this particular scene. Nobody else had their gun out. There was no threat at all. So there's more to the case. There's definitely evidence for this case to move forward. I'm not surprised Brooks dismissed it. She's been trying to justify it. And her focus is on dismantling Chester Boudin's prosecution. It's not about the evidence. It's not about my nephew, who's a black man that was murdered. Thank you.
Now, if the press corps has any questions, we will field the questions at this time. Any questions?
Yes, sir. Is there a specific list of things you would like the city to do, these so-called reparations? Have you concluded what it is specifically that you would like the city to do? Or are you at that?
There are various things that members of the commission have been in deliberation on. However, basically, fundamentally, black people need health care. If we don't have health care, how are you going to be around to make money or to use the money? That's number one. Number two, education. Black in this school district at the bottom of the ladder, at the bottom of the well, when it comes to academic performance. That needs to stop in this district. Also, there's a glaring disparity in the number of black teachers and administrators. That needs to be dealt with, and we need to do more than talk about it. We've had too many task force on equity, but we have not made it equal yet. So we need to make sure that our young people are getting compensatory help to catch up where they're behind. Next, in the area of housing, it is a shame that in this city and county, African Americans are not getting fair housing. Many of these developments that were developed by black people 40 to 50 years ago, El Bethel Arms for seniors. I quote one specific fact here. Out of 355 units, 355, there are only about 45 black people living there. Why? Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey, named for two iconic black men. That great man who really gave us that phrase, awake, be awoke, Marcus Garvey. And then, of course, named for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the great person whom we quote every year at his birthday. But we don't fight for the principles that he stood for in this nation in terms of equality, justice, peace, love, and all those good things. So you see, we should have at least in that development, at least a fair number. But what are the facts? It is now 70% Asian and 30% African American. And we're not putting down anyone else. All we're asking for is our fair share. Fair share, that's all. Make it equal. And I think that's reasonable, and people who have common sense and are rational here. But unfortunately, we have far too many in this city who are indifferent or else they're adamantly opposed to black people even getting fair housing. And then the other area is criminal justice and restorative justice. When you look at this criminal justice system, it is broken. And I need not bore you with all the quotes as to how we are disproportionately represented there. About 45% of those who are locked up in the jails, in the prisons, are African Americans. The area of homelessness. Here we are, 4% of the population, but we're 40% of the homeless in this city. That is terrible. That is tragic. And we ought to be calling for a state of emergency around this issue of homelessness and the disparities. And another area I would say, even in terms of public safety and giving us a fair opportunity for our community to be clean and not be a place where we have all of these tents. We are not against homeless people. We've housed them here at this church. We fed them, continue to feed them, we clothe them. But you go over there to that Fillmore Shopping Center, and you will see a vast contrast between what's happening there and over there on Market. Go to that store. Go to Costco. You will see it with your own eyes. And we ought to see that our case is fair, is just, and we ought to be heard. Even in terms of the homeless program. Who's controlling it? Who's over this cottage industry? Not us. And if we don't act in this area, again, we show that even at the level of homelessness, there is a glaring reflection of inequities and injustice. It's kicking, alive and doing well. And finally, our watering hole. I have to repeat that. I must say we must have our watering hole. The Chinese can have Chinatown, that's their watering hole. If the Japanese got Japantown thriving over there, that's their watering hole. If the Italians can have Little Italy, that's their watering hole. The Latinos have the Mission, that's their watering hole. And the white folks got most of the financial district. That's their big watering hole. But when it comes to African Americans, being able to have a place to meet, to celebrate our culture, we don't have it. And even psychologists say that when a people are marginalized and they are not connected, it has an adverse effect on their psychic, their emotions, and their well-being. So let us just be human. And as the good book says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's where we're coming from. Those are some of the specifics. There are other things that we're going to mention, but these are areas that ought to be addressed. And that spend has been put out there about $5 million. Well, people who were in pain are saying the pain has been so excruciating. And we know how to count and figure. But if we were paid back, even the $5 million wouldn't be that much. Well, somebody said nationally it would be between 12 and $14 trillion. 12 and 14 trillion for 244 years of organized, systematized, brutalized enslavement, and 400 years around the world. And if anybody went to Cape Coast Castle on the west coast of Africa and see with your own eyes how our ancestors were stacked down in dungeons, thousands of them, they couldn't even get out to answer nature's call. They were in their own stench for 4 months. And the Church of England had the gall to have an ornate chapel up on the top level. And it had a trap door where they could look through and see if anyone got out of line. And if you did, you would be put in the lowest dungeon where you would have eventually death. And then on top of that, another 4 months across that Atlantic Ocean, stacked like sardines in cans. So we have gone through something that no one else has gone through. And we're not comparing here. Pain is pain, wrong is wrong. But we're saying, when you look at the facts that stand up, they're glaring. America, California, and San Francisco. It's time for you to make amends and pay back. So that's what it's all about. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You listed a pretty good list of concerns: healthcare, education, housing, criminal justice, restorative justice, homelessness, a neighborhood. Do you worry that this $5 million figure that's been kind of put out there distracts from what seems like a comprehensive concern. And
It should not distract at all. Why? Because the task force has done its work. They presenting what they see. But it's up to that board of supervisors to show that they have a bone of justice and fairness in that. And that they will vote for the measures that will address the things that we have listed as being of paramount concern to us.
On the O'Neill case, we've been in communication on this one. The attorney, you asked that the Attorney General take a look at this case. The district attorney has now tried to send it up to the Attorney General's office as well. Have you heard anything back from Bonta's office? And are we kind of in a waiting pattern here on this case now, trying to figure out what's going to happen between now and March 1st?
As of now, we haven't heard from Bonta's office, but there's been a lot of support. The Black Lives Matter is doing a rally, the longshoremen's. And so it's just getting voices out there. I'll be speaking, getting the support, because my voice alone can't carry this. This is beyond me. I'm just a small voice, a victim, just trying to keep it alive. It seems like my nephew was being forgotten, and that he's coming back now. They're bringing him back to life. As far as Brooks, the reason why she did that, because we had did a letter prior telling her to step down, and she was refusing to step down. So I do believe because of the pressure, the media, people getting involved, other organizations, that she's kind of have to step down. According to the law, Bonta legislation was passed July of 2023 that now says when there is a homicide against an unarmed civilian with a policeman, the district attorney is supposed to take those cases in the future. But it doesn't mean they can't open up old cases. It doesn't, and my nephew's case is still alive. It's not dismissed yet. So he can definitely take this case. He has the ultimate authority to proceed over this case or any other cases. So hopefully that will happen. That's what legislation said. It's kind of expected, but he is the one that makes the call.
You know, the standard, just one point on that, correct, is that the standard for the Attorney General to take the case is called abuse of discretion. And so therefore, he has to evaluate whether or not the district attorney has abused their position in making a decision to do or not. And you could say they could because the evidence is clearly there. If you look at what the police did in terms of the police department, as well as what we did, as well as looking at the evidence itself, you could look at that evidence and say there should be a prosecution. And for you not to do that, that could be an abuse of discretion, an abuse of your position, because you basically ignored the facts that were presented before you. And that's the kind of consideration he has to go through now, as opposed to in future cases. He doesn't have to do that. As soon as a case comes up and a police officer kills someone who's unarmed, then he automatically, in fact, I've had another case where that has come into play. So that's for the future, and that's a good sign.
In this case, you mentioned abuse of discretion. This was a case that was first dismissed by Gascon and then charged by Boudin, and now is potentially dismissed again. Do you feel that optimally you would like the AG to take this over and not have to have the San Francisco District Attorney's Office involved?
We wrote a letter. I had met with, my attorney and I, Brian Ford, had met with Brooke Jenkins because I am definitely enforcing my victim rights. Sadly, the DA is supposed to be standing with victims. They should be telling you what your rights is. This is an unusual situation that I'm, as a victim, is standing against the district attorney and enforcing my rights as a victim. And at this time that, and so we didn't want her. I don't want her on the case. I'm very concerned of her evidence that she doesn't present, because I did work with the prior district attorney, Chesa Boudin's office, and that DA, we were very in sync. We worked side by side. So I'm very much, no evidence that I feel would be strong in the case, that I don't feel she wants to present. And everybody knows with preliminary hearing, if you don't, it depends on the evidence you show the judge. And if you don't show the correct evidence or the strong evidence, the judge says they will not allow the trial. So it's all in their hands, the evidence that they show. So no, I don't want her to touch it. I really would like Bonta's office to get involved, because then I feel that there will be a fair trial. Justice will be fairly presented in this case.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just in terms of working on the recommendations, I understand the committee is going to be meeting with the board of supervisors to make their presentation in March and in June. Are there plans to work in some kind of binding language in the information that you give to the board of supervisors so that they take action on whatever? Because one of the concerns I know people have had in the past is that the city has looked at the issue of reparations in the past, commissions the studies, they look at it, and then nothing gets done. Is work underway to try to make sure that this is not a repeat of what we've seen in the past?
Well, the difference is, in this instance, that we had a focused commission that never was in the past, and that goes for statewide too. However, you are correct. It's traction that must be had. There must be application. And we should make this thing a paralysis of an analysis. We've had so many studies of black folk, going back to The American Dilemma by Gardner Murdoch. It's over 80 years ago. Then the Kerner Commission report after the riots. Andrew Hacker's book, Two Nations, Divided, Hostile, Unequal, in the 90s. We've had in San Francisco, the out-migration report under Gavin Newsom, and under Mr. Jordan, the mayor of the city, the unfinished agenda. The question becomes, when are we going to stop? And I can go way back in history. 40 acres of mule. When those 20 black preachers met in Savannah, Georgia, January the 12th, 1865, and General Sherman asked Reverend Garrison Frazier, what do you feel the Union owes U.S. slaves? He said, I can't speak for everybody, General, but at least we ought to have some of this land that we have been slaving on all this time. Why can't we have 40 acres so we'll be able to build our communities, educate our children, and survive? But you know what happened? That racist man from Tennessee, from Nashville, Tennessee, Andrew Johnson, who became president, unfortunately, after President Lincoln was assassinated. That man revoked Field Order number 15. They set aside the 40 acres and later a mule. But even though he didn't get impeached, not one vote, he stayed there in the White House, but he kept on messing with us. But we were thrown into a system known as the peonage system, sharecropping. And we stayed in debt, and our land was taken away from us. And in 1900, African Americans owned in this nation 19 million acres of land. But today we have less than 3 million. Less than 3. So yet people are saying, we don't owe you anything. That's not true. The question is, do you have the decency to say, I'm sorry, and I'll make amends? And as Brother Daniel said, even with a criminal, if you found guilty in court, what happened? You got to pay what? Some kind of restitution. But even America has been so low down on this issue of race and injustice that it refuses to follow its own principles of justice when it comes to us. So that's the reason why we say again, this is Valentine's Day, and it's time for America to catch up and show some love and stop all this hate that you've been perpetrating against Jews and blacks and gay folks and anybody who's different. That's what it's come to in this nation. Just think about it. Down there in Ocala, Florida, last week, do you know what happened? Council? a form was sent out. This is DeSantis' evil. A form was sent out to parents from this school saying, do you want your child to learn to lift every voice and sing? Can you all believe that? But that's what this nation has fallen to lies, vicious, vile politics. That kind of a note will go out to parents. And that hymn doesn't speak about killing anybody. It doesn't speak about carnage coming from us. It says, lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoice and rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Now what's wrong with that? But DeSantis, who's so greedy for power, DeSantis, who doesn't have truth in it, is going to try to step on the legacy of black folk in order for him to say, I'm Mr. President. But may God bless us that we will never get another person like him or one Donald Trump in that White House, or else America's going to go down the tube. If you don't believe it, let me tell you as a historian, just read Gibbon's book, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. It's all right there. There are eerie parallels of what was happening in Rome before she fell. And if we don't wake up and stay awake in this nation, we're going to go the way of Rome and America. America will not see God's grace shining on it.
Is there a dollar amount at all? Are you asking, this may be so many questions, but in terms of reparations, are you saying?
No, we're not going up that road.
Okay.
We're going up the road of saying we deserve everything that other folks who didn't look like us got. So we're not going to get that completely about the dollar amount, but we won't put what's coming to us.
Well, everything we got coming.
And let's not forget, you know, what Dr. Brown too has been speaking of, we have 111 recommendations. So if you go to our website, www.sfreparations.org, 53 pages, get yourself a cup of coffee, read through the document. It's well written, it specifies, bullet point, each and every issue that Dr. Brown mentioned, from health, education, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, again, you know, that 5 million number got people attention, and obviously now we're having a discussion, which we need. But this body here in San Francisco stand in solidarity with all the cities and, you know, throughout America, as well as the national reparations effort with HR 40. So there's much more work needs to be done, but we're within our timeline, and I think that's what Dr. Brown is.
What's the website again?
www.sfreparations.org.
Yes, sir.
Is this the finished document of recommendations, or is it still in progress?
It's a draft.
It's a draft.
Yes, sir.
All right.
And remember, March 14th, we want to see all of you at City Hall. And tell your friends, tell Ray Ray, tell Samantha, show up. You're going to live in a light of love. Thank you so much.
Is it over with? Huh?
Yeah.